thing.
Hey guys, what's happening? Niyat here with Film Comics Explained, and as requested, today we'll be exploring David Yarovesky's 2019 anti-superhero horror film Brightburn, starring Elizabeth Banks and David Denman. Written by cousins Brian and Mark Gunn and produced by Brian's older brother James, who has delighted us with his quirky genre-matching films Slither, Super, and The Guardians of the Galaxy, Brightburn is an original story that serves as a dark mirror to the Superman mythos, while also borrowing elements from the Berserker manga and Grant Morrison's comic book series Nameless. Set in the fictional town of Brightburn, Kansas, the film follows Tori and Carl Breyer, a farming couple who find a crashed spacecraft on their property containing an infant. Given the difficulties they had over the years trying to conceive a child, the Bryers adopt the boy as their own and name the child Brandon. What at first appears to be a gift from the heavens soon turns out to be something monstrously sinister, with the boy displaying otherworldly powers and a disturbing proclivity towards evil. Functioning as a supervillain origin story, the film explores the relationship between nature and nurture in determining a person's future through Brandon Breyer, a child of indeterminate origins whose inner conflict between reciprocating the love and compassion given to him by loved ones and his genetically ingrained predatory instinct is made bare. The classic tale of Superman, used as a template for this movie, has captured the imaginations of comic book fans since his first appearance in Action Comics issue number 1, and his origin story, powers, and heroic adventures are known by all. Simply put, a child, Kal-El, from the dying world of Krypton is sent to Earth by his parents Lara and Jor-El to ensure that their civilization lived on through him. Raised by loving farmers Jonathan and Martha Kent, the boy named Clark discovers his latent superhero powers as a result of his alien lineage, and through guidance from his adoptive parents and the spectre of his biological father, goes on to become a savior of humankind. While Superman's powers are the result of his extraterrestrial genetics and their interaction with Earth's atmospheric conditions, the way he chooses to use these powers are directly linked to the nurturing environment he grew up in. It's not so much nature versus nurture, but nature in relation to nurture that geneticists would say results in Clark Kent's transformation into Superman. When it comes to Brightburn, Brandon was also a special child from another world that was sent to Earth. But unlike Superman, who came to Earth as a refugee, Brandon was a one-man invasion force. His powers, like Superman, are the result of his extraterrestrial genetics, but instead of using them to help others and become a symbol of hope, Brandon puts his abilities towards nefarious purposes and transforms into a symbol of despair. While it can be argued that his mind is torn between the loving person the Bryers want him to be and his hereditary instinct which drives him towards evil, the film asks, can a child's loving upbringing override their inherent nature and help mold them into a positive icon for good? And answers no. The film opens in the year 2006 with a spaceship crash landing on the Breyer property. After finding an infant child inside the ship, the couple choose to adopt the boy as their own and hide his spacecraft in the cellar to protect him. All seems to go well at first, with Brandon appearing to be everything they dreamed of, a happy, intelligent, and curious young child. But their hopes begin to crumble approaching his 12th birthday, when the hidden ship begins transmitting an alien message to Brandon that puts him in a trance and draws the boy to the cellar. Although Tori intervenes and takes him back to the house, this moment marks the beginning of the end for the family, with Brandon's powers awakening soon after this. The very next day, Brandon attempts to mow the lawn, but when he tries to start the motor, he unintentionally launches the lawnmower across the field, revealing his latent superhuman strength. Curious about his newfound abilities, Brandon puts his hand in the spinning blade and breaks it without getting so much as a scratch. Teased at school about his genius-level intellect, and with no real friends of his own, Brandon passes the time by scribbling a strange symbol resembling 2 back-to-back B's in his journal, representing his name, Brandon Breyer, along with drawings of his newly developing persona, Brightburn. Taken directly from the Berserker manga, known for its gratuitous violence and otherworldly evil, in the Berserker expanded universe, the symbol references a demonic spirit that is summoned by a unique mark known as the Brand of Sacrifice, which closely resembles the one we see Brandon drawing. This strange symbol is also seen in Grant Morrison's Nameless comic book series as a representation of the insanity of an interdimensional god. Based on these inspirations, I took the symbol to be a visual motif of Brandon's inner struggle to discover his place in the world and find meaning in the strange, indecipherable alien voice in the back of his head. This is later confirmed when these seemingly innocent drawings would eventually go on to become a sigil of evil, like an inversion of Clark Kent's S, which stood for hope. Although the film doesn't give us an explanation as to where exactly Brandon was from, discussions by the cast and crew during interviews seem to imply that he belonged to a powerful species of super beings from another galaxy that sent their young to other worlds in an effort to take over the universe. This is even alluded to by Brandon at school when he's asked about the differences between bees and wasps, and he explained that bees are pollinators while wasps were predators. He then expands on this by citing the example of Pallistus salsifer wasps, which were unable to build their own nests and took advantage of less powerful creatures to rear their young. This is exactly what's been done with Brandon. His family had sent him and assumedly more of his kin to various planets to be raised by the local species, and eventually dominate the worlds as their own. And the message that Brandon receives from the ship is essentially designed to trigger his genetic predisposition towards aggressive domination. This darker side is first revealed to Kyle and Tori during his 12th birthday party, when his aunt and uncle gift him a hunting rifle, which his father refuses him to have, and Brandon disobediently acts out.
Give it to me.
I'm sorry, what'd you just say to me?
I said, give it to me!
On the surface, this seems like the typical reaction of an adolescent that's been told what to do, but his frustration had more to do with his predatory instincts being repressed by his father. The rifle is a symbol of power and the ability to take a life, and Brandon is a wolf in sheep's clothing, being told that he cannot be his true self. Wanting to punish the boy, Carl stops the party and demands that they leave, but when he tries to pull Brandon out of the seat, he finds that he's physically incapable of moving him. It's not until Tori pleads with Brandon to obey his father that the boy complies. Yearning to get away from town and spend some quality time together as a family, Kyle and Tori decide to take Brandon camping. Just as they're packing to leave, Tori discovers photos of swimsuit models, surgical diagrams, and graphic photos of human organs in Brandon's room. Misinterpreting these photos as pubescent curiosity, Kyle gives his son the birds and the bees talk when they go hunting, and explains that the act of sex isn't so much about the organs involved, but about the love between two people. Unfortunately, this talk ends up having the undesirable effect of inspiring the boy to sneak away and stalk his classmate Caitlin. When the Bryes return home, Kyle notices the chickens were terrified of Brandon's presence, and is awoken later that night by their screams to find that they'd been slaughtered. Although Kyle tells Tori that their son was responsible, she refuses to accept that Brandon was capable of such a thing, and brushes it off as a wolf attack, in a great example of how someone can be so wrong and yet so right at the same time. Having desensitized himself from committing violence, Brandon then attacks his first human the very next day, after falling during a trust exercise at school. Though she had shown him kindness in the past, Caitlin chooses not to catch him and calls him a pervert for creeping into her room. Forced by her teacher to help the boy up, when Caitlin extends her hand, Brandon grabs it and begins to crush every bone, leading to his suspension from school. I thought it was interesting to note that Brandon's costume begins to transform. Initially grey and white, signifying his innocence, his wardrobe slowly changes to red with each dark act he commits, until he finally assembles his Brightburn outfit, crystallizing his transition from a troubled boy to a psychopathic killer. Drawn to the ship again that night, Brandon breaks the lock on the cellar door and begins levitating in front of the spacecraft while chanting the ship's alien message. Seeing red lights emanating from the barn, Tori runs in and severs his connection, causing Brandon to fall and cut himself on the ship, revealing his kryptonite and his only weakness. While reviewing the first injury he's ever had, Brandon asks his mother who he was and where he came from. Tori admits that although she and Kyle may have lied about adopting him from the agency, he was still her son, before confessing that he'd actually come from the stars in the vessel that just cut him, a truth which causes Brandon to run away in anger. In this rage, Brandon's heat vision begins to manifest, and the alien message from the ship is finally translated in his head to mean, "Take the world," setting the boy out on a night of death and carnage against those that had wronged him, beginning with Caitlin's mother Erica, who had forbidden him from seeing Caitlin ever again. In one of the most terrifying scenes in the film, Brandon finds Erica alone at the diner and begins toying with her like a wolf by covering the windows with his symbol and shattering the lights above her, causing a piece to get stuck in her eye, which she painstakingly removes in a moment that certified the film's R rating. With blood obscuring her vision, we see Brandon appear and disappear to the left of her field of view, visually reinforcing the notion that he'd now transformed into Brightburn and was no longer redeemable. After terrifying Erica some more, Brandon eventually kills her and transports her to the farm. The following day at school, Brandon meets up with his aunt and school psychologist, Marilee, to discuss his attack on Caitlin. With Brandon ranting about being special and showing no signs of remorse for what he did, Marilee pleads with him to talk to her before informing him that she was required to update his parents, the school, and the sheriff in 2 days on his progress, or lack thereof. Agitated by his aunt, Brandon arrives at her home later that night and tells her that it would be bad for him, his parents, and especially bad for Marilee if she talked to the sheriff. With his aunt refusing to give in to his demands, Brandon lies and tells her that he was going home, before donning his Brightburn costume and stalking her around the house. When she goes to bed, Noah arrives and finds Brandon in the closet. Brandon pleads with his uncle and asks if he was going to tell his parents, and Noah foolishly tells him that it's the least he'll be doing, prompting Brandon to lash out. Noah then tries to drive away, but Brandon lifts his car up and hurls it to the ground, gruesomely killing his uncle in what can only be described as a morbid nod to Superman's first appearance in Action Comics issue number 1. What's more, Brandon uses Noah's blood to draw his symbol at the crime scene. Returning home without a shirt, Brandon explains to his parents that the other students had ripped it off in another incident of bullying, but both Tori and Kyle see through his lies. This distrust is magnified when Marilee calls Kyle and Tori to inform them of Noah's car accident and how Brandon had been in their home the previous night. Noah is announced dead at the hospital the next morning, and when Kyle and Tori tell Brandon of his death, the boy has no reaction, angering Kyle, who accuses Brandon of foul play in Noah's death and triggers Brandon into violently throwing his father up against the wall. Realizing what Brandon was on his way to becoming, Kyle plans an impromptu hunting trip as a ruse to kill the boy. But when he shoots him in the back of the head with a hunting rifle, the bullet bounces off. Betrayed by his father, Brandon gives in to his anger and mercilessly burns a hole in his father's skull using his heat vision. What's sad is that up until that point, Brandon respected both his parents. He may not have always agreed with them, but there was definitely love there, and he genuinely cared about what they thought of him, which is why he often threatened people not to tell them anything. While understandable and arguably necessary by this point, Kyle's betrayal pushes Brandon past the point of no return. Meanwhile, the sheriff arrives at the Bryant residence and asks if he could see Brandon. When told that the boys had gone camping, he explains that he wanted to ask the boy about the strange symbol that was found at the scene of Erica and Noah's deaths. Having seen Brandon draw the symbol in his journal, Tori lies and feigns ignorance before telling him to leave her property. It's not until Tori begins going through his journal, which showed illustrations of the murders, his new persona Brightburn, and the message "Take the World," that Tori realizes her little boy was a superpowered psychopath on his way to becoming a powerful and callous serial killer. Tori then tries to call Kyle, but Brandon answers the phone instead and tells her that Kyle was gone. Although Tori immediately calls the sheriff for help, Brandon flies home and begins destroying the house before brutally murdering the sheriff and his deputy. Remembering that the only thing that could injure Brandon was the ship he came in, Tori makes for the barn and discovers Erica's mutilated body nailed to the wall, surrounded by Brandon's symbols. After arming herself with a piece of the ship, Tori embraces Brandon and tells him that there was still some good inside of him. And though he tells her that he wanted to be good, Tori tries to stab him and gets caught. Now completely consumed by rage as a result of being betrayed by his mother and the only link he had to humanity, Brandon carries her up to the clouds and drops Tori down to her death. We then see a plane fly towards Brandon, and while the scene fades to black, it's implied that Brandon had crashed the plane into his home, killing everybody on board while simultaneously destroying any evidence of his wrongdoing. With his connection to humanity severed, Brandon completely gives in to his Brightburn persona and begins his genetically ingrained quest for world domination. The movie then cuts to conspiracy theorist Big T in an awesome cameo from longtime James Gunn collaborator Michael Rooker, who begins ranting about the existence of super beings on Earth. Interestingly, along with Brightburn, he explains that there was a half-man, half-sea creature terrorizing the oceans, as well as a supernatural woman that choked her victims with rope. This is obviously a clear reference to DC's Wonder Woman and Aquaman, which along with a drawing of an alien that resembled DC's Martian Manhunter, and a photo of a guy in a red costume that looked like the Flash, alluded to DC's Justice League, complementing the film's Superman analogy. Having said that, I doubt that all these guys are evil, as the guy in red is actually the Crimson Bolt, a superhero character played by Rainn Wilson in James Gunn's Super, hinting to Brightburn actually being a sequel.
Shut up, crime. Here's the Crimson Bolt.
It's also worthy of noting that in the film Super, Wilson's character, Frank Darbo, is a short-order cook with a troubled life that becomes the Crimson Bolt in a misguided effort to clean up his community. And in this film, the diner where Erica worked is called Darbo's Family Grill. Coincidence? I think not.
He's got a diner. He's got a diner in Kansas, so who knows how he's got it, but
Oh
yes,
my
he
gosh,
does.
that is so funny.
That's pretty good.
I mean,
In fact, Gunn, who is currently busy writing and directing the third installment to the Guardians of the Galaxy, as well as the Suicide Squad, has said that he and the writers intended to bridge some of his established worlds together and expand the Brightburn universe as a darker, mirror-like counterpart to DC's extended universe.
Back in your office, you mentioned something about talking to the sheriff tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah, the thing is, that can't happen. Ever.
I think it goes without saying that Jackson A. Dunn, who plays Brandon, is phenomenal and plays the dual roles of a conflicted child trying to make sense of the world around him and an unconscionable psychopath with ease. But what really sold the film for me is its two leads, Elizabeth Banks and David Denman. From the get-go, you really buy into their relationship and the difficulty they were having with conceiving a child, which is why we don't fault them for keeping Brandon's origin a secret. To them, it almost seems as though God himself had answered their prayers and sent them the one thing they wanted most in the world. For a horror film, a genre usually synonymous with characters making stupid decisions to drive the plot, the brides make sensible decisions, and their demise in the film's climax is mostly inevitable. And unlike other horror films about troubled children, where the parents seem oblivious to their kids' malevolence, the brides suspect something is wrong early on, and do the best that they can with what they have, which is why it's so heartbreaking when everything falls apart. Having said that, good decision making isn't consistent with the rest of the characters, who often make poor choices given the information they have, which usually leads to their deaths.
Is it nurture or nature? Is this kid bad, or did they do something wrong? Mm-hmm. I actually think there's sort of an answer in the movie. Whether you're adopting a child or giving birth to a child, you're inviting a stranger into your home, no matter who that is, and you don't know who that stranger is going to end up being.
I get that it's a movie about a supervillain, but given its main theme of nature and nurture, it would have been great to see more of that inner conflict within Brandon. Despite the few scenes of happiness we see with the Briars, and Brandon's insistence that he wanted to be good, we don't see any evidence of that throughout the film. If we'd seen Brandon using his abilities to save people, even for the briefest of moments, I think it would have made the ending much more tragic. But with all that having been said, I really enjoyed this film, and I'm curious to hear what you guys thought about it, and if you had any theories of your own. So please share these in the comments below. And a huge thanks to everyone who requested we explore Brightburn. Don't forget to hit subscribe and click the notification icon to stay up to date on all my content. And if there's anything else you'd like to request, please don't hesitate to ask. As always, it's been a pleasure. Niyat here with Film Comics Explained. Thanks for stopping by.